I never thought love would feel like this. The night I met Adrian, the air was warm, the city lights glowing like fireflies scattered across the streets. I had gone out with friends, half-heartedly, already prepared for another dull evening of small talk and empty drinks. And then he appeared. He wasn't the tallest man in the room, nor the loudest, but he carried himself with a kind of confidence that pulled me in. His smile was easy, natural, as if he knew a secret no one else could touch. When our eyes met, it felt like gravity shifted. We spoke for hours that night, about books, about music, about dreams. He told me he wanted to start his own company, to build something meaningful. He listened when I spoke, really listened, his gaze steady and warm. It was intoxicating. By the time he walked me home, my cheeks hurt from smiling. When he kissed me goodnight, I thought I had found something rare, the kind of love that only happens once. Looking back, I realize now, it was never love I found. It was obsession. His with admiration, and mine with believing in fairy tales. For the first 6 months, we were inseparable. Long dinners, spontaneous weekend trips, lazy mornings tangled in each other's arms. My friends said we looked perfect together, and I believed it. But then, the shadows began to creep in. The first time it happened was at a cafe. The waitress leaned in a little too close when she took his order. He smiled back, held her gaze just a little too long. A spark of jealousy burned in me, but I smothered it quickly. Don't be paranoid, I told myself. He's with you. Weeks later, he started working late. Always meetings, always deadlines. His phone buzzed constantly, and sometimes he stepped out of the room to answer. When I asked, he brushed it off. Work stuff. You wouldn't understand. I tried to be understanding, supportive. I told myself not to be controlling, not to be the girlfriend who smothers. But in the quiet hours of the night, lying awake next to his sleeping body, unease grew like a weed in my chest. The cracks were small, but they were there, and I knew, deep down, something was wrong. The truth came on an ordinary Wednesday. I had baked cupcakes, vanilla with chocolate frosting, his favourite. I wanted to surprise him after work, to remind him of what we had, to rekindle the spark I felt slipping away. His door was unlocked. That should have been my first warning. Inside I heard laughter, a woman's laugh, high-pitched and breathless, and then his voice, low, playful, the way it used to be with me. My legs felt like stone, but I walked forward anyway, clutching the box of cupcakes like a lifeline. And there he was, Adrian, shirtless, a woman draped across his lap, wearing his shirt like it belonged to her. The box slipped from my hands, cupcakes scattered across the floor, frosting smeared like spilled blood. His face drained of colour. He stammered, "It's not what it looks like." But the words died as the girl laughed, her smirk cutting sharper than any knife. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I turned and walked out. My silence was louder than his excuses. That silence became my shield and my weapon. For days I disappeared into myself. I went to work. I came home. I ate little, spoke less. My friends called, begged me to talk. I ignored them. The world outside blurred into meaningless noise. At night, I sat in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My eyes looked hollow, my skin pale, my lips cracked. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked weak, broken. But one night, something shifted. I don't know what triggered it. Maybe the memory of her laugh, maybe the way Adrian's face looked when he realized I had seen. But as I stared into my reflection, I saw something new flicker in my eyes. Not grief, not weakness, fire. and in that fire was clarity. I wasn't going to forgive. I wasn't going to forget. I was going to make him pay. Revenge isn't loud. It isn't impulsive. It's precise, surgical. Adrian's weakness was obvious. His ego. He thrived on admiration, on being wanted. He needed it like oxygen. Without it, he would suffocate. So I started small. I answered his calls, listened to his apologies, pretended to waver. He swore it meant nothing, that he was lost, that I was the only one he truly loved. My voice softened at the right moments. I let silence stretch just long enough to make him desperate. And finally, I said the words he longed for. Maybe we can try again. He believed me instantly. Men like him always do. Meanwhile, I transformed. I bought new clothes, bold, striking, powerful. I started working out, eating better, carrying myself with a confidence I hadn't known before. People noticed, colleagues, strangers, even his friends. And Adrian noticed most of all. His jealousy simmered beneath his forced smiles, his grip on me tightening when other men's eyes lingered too long. He thought he had me back. He thought he had won. But the truth was simple. The game had just begun. The first acts of revenge were small, almost clinical. I wanted the slow, corrosive effect. Not an explosion, but an erosion. I wanted him to feel the same hollow that had hollowed me. I started by claiming the high ground. I posted photos on social media of myself laughing with friends, of gallery openings and late-night coffees, captions that hinted at growth and independence. I made it look effortless, and he hated it. His comments grew pricklier, his messages more possessive. He would show up unannounced, stand in the doorway, and try to press affection into a space where it no longer fit. At parties, I let him think he had me. I stood close, touched his arm, murmured honeyed words. Then, when he stepped away, I let a flirtatious laugh escape me in someone else's direction. Nothing overt, nothing that could be pointed to and condemned, but enough to seed uncertainty. He began to monitor, to question, to second guess. The need to control wrapped around him like a tightening knot. Meanwhile, I cultivated conversations. I let his friends see me in new contexts, competent, witty, in demand. I spoke about hypothetical opportunities with a dramatic tilt of the head, never specifying names, never revealing plans. The ambiguity gnawed at him. The man who had once preyed on admirers now found himself alone in a room full of people who no longer elevated him. But the real satisfaction came in quiet moments. A wronged glance from a colleague when he tried to dominate a conversation. A job offer he overheard me discuss. Nothing formal, mostly bluffing, that made his smile falter. I watched him deflate in inches, not with anger, but with an ache that had no remedy. His confidence, which had been his armor, thinned like old fabric. For the second act, I needed something unmistakable. Subtlety had prepared the stage. Now I wanted the curtain to fall. I organized a casual brunch. Friends, a few acquaintances, the sort of gathering that felt harmless and warm. Adrian, proud as ever, loved the idea. He dressed with deliberate ease, practiced charm in the mirror, and made sure he was seen. He believed he was back on top. I arrived later than he expected, drawing a few admiring looks. I was luminous in a way that had nothing to do with makeup. It was the certainty that came from purpose. Midway through the meal, conversation drifted toward travel and mistakes. Someone joked about bad decisions that taught us lessons, and the table erupted in laughter and stories. I waited until the room had softened, until the mood was right. Then, in a voice that matched the casualness of the topic, I told my story. not the shattering cinematic confession I had rehearsed in private. Instead, a calm recitation, details placed like stones in a path, how I had come home that day, the cupcakes, the laugh, the woman in his shirt. I watched his face as the sentences landed. At first, denial, muscle memory, then anger, then, finally, the collapse. He stumbled through explanations. Some friends turned away, uncomfortable with the rawness. Others looked at him differently, like someone who had been wearing a costume that suddenly no longer fit. The woman in question was mentioned, not by name, but in enough detail that the consequences rippled. It wasn't a smear, it was truth, and truth has a way of doing damage without theatrics. By the time the brunch ended, Adrian was a husk. He tried to salvage dignity, but dignity is a fragile currency. People talked in corners, their eyes avoiding his. The man who used to command rooms now fumbled in them, a relic of his own making. The final act didn't happen on a stage or with a speech. It happened in the aggregate, the slow accumulation of losses that leave a person unrecognizable. His clients stopped returning calls. The projects he bragged about stalled. Conversations at work shifted from admiration to careful pity. The women who once flirted now crossed the street to avoid him. He tried to fight back with outrage, with public apologies and contrite gestures, but every attempt felt performative, hollow. People know when someone is truly sorry and when someone is merely performing to save their skin. I didn't need to gloat as I watched. The pleasure was quiet, reflective, like standing across the river and watching something I'd let burn. I saw the arrogance he had wrapped himself in dissolve into an ache that was entirely his. I felt no triumph in his suffering, only a curious and terrible peace. The night he came to my door and begged, his words like wet paper, I felt the last of the old me fold away. He said everything people say when they are desperate: confessions, explanations, promises to change. I listened, and then I spoke. "You broke my trust," I said, voice steady. "And you broke your word so many times it lost its meaning. I taught you the rules of the game, Adrian. You taught me how to play it." He looked at me with the hollow pleading of a man who had been stripped. I closed the door. It was not cruelty, it was finality. Time, as it always does, smoothed the sharp edges. The ache softened into memory, the nights into mornings. I moved to a smaller apartment with better light. I took classes I'd always postponed. I travelled alone, at first clumsily, then with growing confidence. I learned to enjoy the company of my own thoughts. People sometimes asked if I felt guilty, if I regretted the ways I'd manipulated, the lies I'd told, the faces I had blackened with truth. The answer is complicated. There are nights I wake, remembering the sound of frosting hitting the floor, and feel a twinge of sorrow for what was lost. Not the man, but the portion of myself that had once believed in easy fairy tales. There are mornings, too, when I wake with a smile, grateful for the clarity that betrayal carved into me. Adrian's story became the cautionary tale for friends who had once envied him. He rebuilt slowly, if at all. I heard rumours, a new job, a new town, attempts at humility that looked awkward and forced. I felt nothing when I read them. Indifference, perhaps, is the truest revenge. When your wound no longer throbs, the power of the person who caused it fades. In the years that followed, I learned two things I wish I had known earlier. The first is that love without boundaries is not love. It is surrender. The second is that reclaiming yourself does not require the suffering of another, but sometimes the mirror has to be held up so they can see themselves clearly. I don't celebrate what I did. I simply accept it as part of my story. A chapter where pain became a teacher and dignity was reclaimed, one quiet decision at a time. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the woman in his shirt. I wonder if she ever felt the weight of the life she stepped into, or if she moved on unscathed. Most of the time, I don't wonder at all. The past has become a place I visit occasionally, like a museum exhibit of who I used to be. Now, when someone asks me whether revenge was worth it, I tell them, revenge, if you must call it that, was never about hurting him so much as saving myself. It was about drawing a line and refusing to live where illusions reign. It was about learning that the sweetest peace comes not from the ruin of another, but from the quiet rebuilding of your own life. And that, in the end, is what I keep. A life rebuilt, honest and slow, sweeter than any vengeance I once imagined.